Yes, Precious. Your hand is up. Your hand is up. Oh, I'm guessing I may
You're moving
proceed.
too you're moving too fast. Can you please be a bit slow?
Okay, I'll do that then.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Let me take a step back. Let me take a step back. We first looked at the auxins that are in plants. We said the first hormone was the auxins. And we said auxins are responsible for apical growth. They are there to bring the growth of the bud of the plant. Okay, they are there to bring that upward growth, and they grow in the direction of the light. Okay, as long as you have these auxins, they'll bring that growth towards the light. And then the other hormone that we had was the gibberellins, and the gibberellins were responsible for the root development or the root growth, and they did this towards gravity. And this was another kind of tropism that we then looked on when we looked at the next part. So these gibberellins, they'll always be found at the root. And these auxins we're talking about will be found at the bud. Then the other hormone that we then looked at was the abscisic acid. And the abscisic acid is there to stop the growth or inhibit the growth, or rather inhibit development. So it is there to say we've reached a certain point where we just cannot keep growing anymore, because maybe at some point it sees that it has reached its height that it can go to, and it can no longer grow further than this, otherwise it's going to fall over. So abscisic acids are responsible for that. Okay, that is the hormones that you had to know in particular, with their names, as well as where they are going to be most highly found. Okay, so now we're just looking at the tropism. We mentioned that tropism is where we have growth towards a specific stimuli. As long as we're growing in response to something, then this is known as tropism. Okay, and this essentially is because you're growing towards something. And we mentioned that there are two types of tropism. There's what is known as geotropism, and there's what is known as phototropism. We mentioned that photo means light, and phototropism is where we have the plant growing towards the light. And the hormone that was responsible for this that we have mentioned was the auxin, like so. The auxin was responsible for phototropism, which is the growth due to light. And then the other one was the geotropism, and the hormone that was responsible for this was the gibberellins, which is essentially the one that brings the root development, like so. So this is where we have the gibberellin being responsible for that growth. So now we're looking specifically at phototropism. So what we are saying is, while we have the bud of a plant, we have to now get into mind the concept of apical dominance, where when we have this bud like this, like so, these auxins are going to be highly concentrated here, which is right at the tip of the bud. And then now we are going to introduce light, which is basically sunlight. And this sunlight, as it is introduced, it is not going to be introduced right at the top of the root. It's not going to be right here, but it's rather going to be from either here or there or wherever. But the idea is that it's going to be unilateral light. It's going to be light coming from one specific direction. So while it is here, it is going to be shining onto that apical bud like that. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind as well is that auxins are afraid of light. So, because they are afraid of light and light is coming from this direction, they are going to run away and get dominated here. So, in other words, our apical dominance when we introduce light is no longer going to be right at the tip, but it's going to be here. It's going to be highly concentrated away from the where the light is. And remember, auxins bring development of the bud. So because they are highly concentrated here, it's going to bring growth on this side of the plant. And this will cause the plant to start growing like this. And as it grows like this, it is essentially actually growing towards the light. And that is phototropism in a nutshell. Now, let me see if I can get any questions. Do you guys have any questions with that theory? You can raise your hand if you have any questions on that. Yes, Rafilwe?
Can you please explain that part earlier? If the light is the side, you grow on each side.
Yes, that is what I just mentioned now. Once again, I'm gonna mention it again here. I'm saying that firstly, without light initially, we're going to have apical dominance at the tip of the root. This is in the absence of light. But now, when we introduce unilateral light, I'm speaking specifically light that comes from a specific direction. Okay, so let's suppose we are introducing light here. The sun is here and it's shining these rays of light there on that part of the plant. Auxins are afraid of light. They will always move away from where the sunlight is coming from. So they are going to actually shy away and be concentrated here. And because auxins bring development, where the part where the auxins are is where growth will be. Because those auxins are right there, you're going to have growth at that point. So it is actually going to be growing at that point, and essentially it's going to curve towards the sun. Okay. Is that fine, Rafile?
Yeah, well understood. Thank you.
Right. Any other? Anyone else? Okay. So I'm guessing you guys are okay with that idea. Okay. So now we're going to then dive into the other one, which is geotropism. So with geotropism, remember now these gibberellin hormones are not going to be found on the apical bud, but they're going to be found on the roots. Okay. So let's suppose the root is something like this. Okay. So these gibberellins, they actually love gravity. Okay. Unlike the auxins, these ones actually love gravity. So we're going to have a high dominance of these gibberellins towards gravity, meaning they'll actually be on this part. They'll be highly dominating on this part of the root right there. You'll have more of these gibberellins right there. And while you have most of them there, it's going to bring development on that part of it. And this will essentially then cause this root to grow and curve that way. Okay. And then you'll have your root growing towards the ground. Okay. Remember, once again, this is tropism. This idea and this concept of tropism, it's a collective word that combines both photo and geotropism. Just like we had nucleotides, we had DNA and RNA. Tropism encapsulates both phototropism and geotropism. But phototropism is growth due to light, and then geotropism is growth due to gravity. Any questions on geotropism? Any questions on geotropism? All right. I'm guessing with the silence, there are no questions on geotropism. Then we're going to now slowly dive into the defense. So just like human beings have these defense methods that are governed by, the adrenaline. When you're in danger, you're either gonna fight or fly away. Then plants have something that is just straight up biological when it comes to its defense. Plants will defend themselves by either using any of the following: by either using thorns. I've actually had a personal encounter with this one. That is not how we spell thorns. Thorns. So they can either have thorns, which is just specifically just there to prick any potential predators that are there to harm the plant. Okay. And a good example you can have of this one is the cactus that is found in the deserts, which looks something like this. If my artistic skills will allow me, looks something like this, and it's full of these thorns. We've probably seen in some of those Wild West movies, we've probably seen some of these. So instead of having these thorns, instead of having leaves, rather, they actually have these thorns, and that is there essentially as a defense mechanism. Then there are also plants that use acidic chemicals. That's not how we spell chemicals. Chemicals. They are there to use chemicals to do that. And I'm sure most of us have probably had an encounter with some plant that you break and it has this whitish liquid that looks like milk. And then if you try to drink it thinking it is milk, you start regretting it because it tastes nothing like milk. That is one example of the chemical use of these defense mechanisms. Now, there are some plants that prefer to not defend, but rather actually attract other organisms to them, like the normal flowers that we know. They have to look pretty and all that, and actually smell good. And this is to attract pollinators like the bees and so on and so forth. Now, some of these other plants they actually have to do the opposite by essentially performing those defensive actions. Okay. Any questions thus far? Any questions?
So can you please repeat?
I did not get that.
So can you please repeat again?
Okay. Here I'm saying when it comes to defense from predators, from potential harm, plants can either use thorns or chemicals. When they use thorns, they are there to prick the predator when it comes, like a goat that is there to eat from a thorny bush. They are there just to prick it to keep it away from that plant in particular. The others can use these chemicals, okay? And these chemicals are there just to either bring that vicious taste that the organism does not want, and then it will then move away from that plant. That is one thing. And then some of them, this chemical can be there as a smell. Okay, remember we had those that were pollinators. They had to look pretty for bees to come to them. Now these other plants like the cactus, and another one is actually though that bush, I honestly don't know what it's called, that you break and it comes out that whitish liquid. They're just there as a defensive mechanism to keep predators away. And this could be any predator in particular, as long as it feels that discomfort when it goes towards that particular plant, then it is a defensive mechanism. Did you get that, Precious?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. So this is essentially the part that you had to know when it came to plant hormones. So I'm hoping you guys are taking note of all the key parts that you may need. So now, once we've gotten that to mind, then we can dive into the concept of evolution, which is honestly the most boring topic I've ever come across. So now we're going to dive into evolution. Okay, but we're going to start off with natural evolution before diving deep into human evolution. So the concept of evolution says that through long periods of time, an organism can undergo certain change and pass on those changes that it went through, okay, to its next generation, and that generation will go through changes and it will pass on to the next generation, and so on and so forth. Okay, so many scientists have studied these changes, okay, but now they're able to come up with a certain statement to say this will happen because of this, or this might happen, and so on and so forth. This is where we now have to truly understand the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Okay, so in life sciences, we've been going through a number of experiments, and we've been told to draft a hypothesis and so on. That is no way to spell theory. Okay, not, okay, it's actually theory. Yeah, it's theory. Okay, so a I'm gonna start off with a hypothesis first. Okay, a hypothesis, it's more of a prediction. Okay, and this is in turn someone else's opinion. So this is a prediction, and this is a prediction that you derive as a way of trying to explain the reason why something can be, or why something can happen, or you're trying to make a prediction of what an outcome may be based on your own understanding of something. And a hypothesis is not based on evidence. Okay, so there is no evidence to a hypothesis. Okay, no evidence. West handwriting. Okay, there is no evidence when it comes to a hypothesis. Remember, this is your own prediction. This is based on your own understanding that this may be the outcome, and it may be because of this. Okay, so this is based on little scientific data, scientific um, data. Okay, so it's based on very little information, and I'm sure you've actually noted that out of those some of those questions that we were usually asked to derive a hypothesis and so on and so forth, it's usually before they even give us the outcomes or the information or the results after they perform the test. That is essentially because these hypotheses have to come out of very little data or very little information provided. Okay, so when we're performing experiments, we usually collect some equipment. If we're going to perform an experiment, if we're going to collect a survey and ask people, then we'll be collecting those responses from the surveys. But before we start looking at our results, we would derive a certain hypothesis. So essentially what we are doing is we're taking a hypothesis and actually testing it. When a hypothesis is tested and found out to be true, okay, when a prediction is found out to be true, it is where it can actually become a theory. And a theory, this is based on evidence. This is based on evidence. Okay? When we base this on evidence, when we test it out, we do the experiment and we find out that the leaf is black or something like that, then there's the presence of starch and so on and so forth, then that is now a theory because it is based on scientific data. So here it's actually based on more or tangible. Okay, when we're saying tangible, I'm talking about something that I can actually see. It's based on more or rather tangible data or tangible proof. As long as I'm able to see that that is the idea and that is where you came up with this, then I can say, oh, this is a theory. So when we're looking at how these experiments are done, this is the idea. So I would firstly draft out a hypothesis. Okay, so I would make a hypothesis. Then I'm going to test this hypothesis. So after testing this hypothesis, there are two possibilities. It's either my hypothesis test can come out as true, okay, or my hypothesis test can come out as false. So if my hypothesis comes out as false, then I'm going to change the hypothesis and then test again. But if it comes out as true, then I can conclude it to be a theory, like so. I can conclude it to be a theory. Okay. Then now, if it has become a theory, I'm going to now start testing it based on large sample or based on multiple of these evidence spaces. For instance, if I'm trying to find out if a certain leaf has starch, okay, and then now I found out that it truly has starch, I can then essentially take that very same experiment I did and start testing the very same thing for a large sample of different other plants, okay? And if I find out that it is actually true for all those other plants like the banana leaves and the apple leaves and the guava leaves, and it is also true. So here now I'm saying it is actually true for all. If it is true for all of those others, it's going to become what is known as a law, like that. Do you guys have any questions on this idea? You may raise your hand. Any questions on this idea? Yes, Rafilwe?
So if your hypothesis is not correct, what
Yes.
happens?
If your hypothesis is not correct, then you are going to take the very same hypothesis and change it into a different hypothesis, and then take that new one and you're going to test it again.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the idea. You're going to just perform repeated tests. Any other? All right. Yes, Tirisan.
Say, how do we get to the law part? I didn't hear that correctly.
Okay, I'll go back to that again. So remember, okay, let me use the example of Pythagoras. So those who are bad at maths, this isn't probably not your day. Pythagoras, remember, he came up with that story of saying, look, in a right angle triangle, blah 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 blah. See, so this guy, he performed a test with multiple kinds of triangles, and then he made a hypothesis first, and then he came up with the story that, look, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the square of the sum of the two other sides, and then he tested that, and it came out as true. Okay, and then as it came out as true, he tried to test it for all the other types of triangles, like the equilateral triangle and the isosceles triangles and the other triangles. But then he realized that it's not true for the other triangles. And this is why we do not call it the law of Pythagoras, but rather the theory of Pythagoras, because it is not true for all. When you take that specific test that you have done for that specific type of thing, and you find out that it's true for all the other kinds of possibilities, and you find out it's true, then it becomes a law. For example, um, we can say hore murder is a bad thing. Do you see? That is actually a law. You should not kill. That's because it applies to everyone. But then if they say do not kill the president, that one is not a law. I can go there and butcher the guy because it does not apply to everyone. But now if this specific thing that I've come up with is true for every type, for every entity, then I can denote hore it is a law. Okay? Did I answer your question, Teresan? Did I answer your question, Teresano? Okay, I'm guessing I did, hopefully. Okay, thumbs up. All right. So, any other questions before I then step into the next part? Okay, I'm guessing you guys are fine. All right. So, once we've understood the idea behind theories and hypotheses, then we have to now start working on biological evolution entirely. So, the idea behind the evolution, once again, is that we're saying over these long periods of time, organisms were undergoing certain changes. Okay, so we have to then understand the reasons why they've changed. This is where you have to now understand the sources of variation. The sources of variation. So when it came to these sources of variation, these were just some of the factors that caused certain organisms to be different from one another. So namely, these sources of variations were, number one, is the famous one that we knew as crossing over. And you recall this happened during meiosis, and this is where you had chromosomes in a homolog pair causing their chromatids to overlap like so at a place, remember, where they touch is known as the chiasmata, and then this is where we'd have those chromosomes exchanging genetic information. This was one of the sources of variation. Then another source of variation was the random assortment. Okay, random assortment. So the idea is that during this is the worst spelling. Okay, this is one word. The idea behind random assortment is during meiosis, you would have this cell that has these chromosomes inside, and these chromosomes are always in constant movement. Okay, they'll go up and down, they'll go left and right, and so on and so forth. And then now the factor that comes to mind is where they'd be by the time it reaches telophase. So if this, let's suppose this chromosome is here by the time it reaches telophase, then it will be splitted and it will be part of this cell. Now this is always random. So it might be that it's not here, it might be there, and then it now gets to become part of that cell. Okay, and that is the concept and the idea behind random assortment, is that that chromosome with its genetic makeup being different from all the other chromosomes would be part of this cell. Okay, and this is all randomly decided, okay, based on the whole Mendel's law of segregation and so on and so forth. Okay, then we had random fertilization. Random fertilization. So the idea behind random fertilization is quite specific to males. We remember in human reproduction, we remember that males would secrete millions of these infinitesimal sperm cells that would carry these different genetic makeup each, because they were essentially gametes. So they'd carry different genetic makeups, and because there's millions of them, we've got this million permutations and million possibilities of how the offspring would look. And that is actually a source of variation, because it would bring a different organism each time, a different looking human being each time. Now I'm not counting the story of twins. Twins is actually because of the mom. Okay, so the idea here is that you have these millions or large sample of these gametes that would bring a different looking person each time. And then the last but not least was the random mating. Okay, and the idea behind random mating is that if I find a person, if I find a mate, and we go through intercourse and everything else, I do not get the choice of picking which characteristic I want to take from that person. It all happens at random, decided by the gametes on their own. So I cannot find myself a yellow bone and be like, Yazin, it's about time we get a light-skinned kid. It's not up to me per se. It's going to be based on the gametes themselves. Okay, so that is essentially the random mating. It's all about you going through that whole fertilization and mating and everything else, but not necessarily deciding on the kinds of characteristics you need to be able to pick out or denote for the offspring to take. Okay, any questions on those variations? Any questions on the variations? All right. I'm guessing by the silence, you guys are fine. All right. So now we know the idea and the story behind these variations. Then we can actually start beginning to map out the idea here. So we're saying that we can have one organism um, go through. Oh, I forgot. There's another source of variation. It's mutation. Yes, I had closely forgotten that. Mutation. And remember, mutation is a sudden change in the genetic makeup of an organism. Okay. And these mutations can be by means of basically anything. It could be pressure changes in the environment. It could be even non-disjunction itself. Cancer is one example of a mutation. You can have that. I can have cancer, and then I can pass on that cancer to my offsprings, and it becomes a hereditary problem. So just also keep in mind mutation being part of the sources of variation. Anywho, as I was saying, we can have one organism that can undergo these variations, and it will pass on some of those variations to the next one. Then this next one will have a combination or a variety per se, and then it will pass on, and then the next one would also have a different variety, and then it would pass on the next one, which would also then have a different variety, and thy kingdom come and thy will be done on earth. So it keeps going and going and going. So there were two scientists that actually sat down and studied this quite closely. So with relative to time, the first scientist who actually saw these changes that were happening from generation to generation was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He was the first scientist, or he was actually not much of a scientist, he was more of a philosopher. His name was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So Lamarck saw these things happening, and he tried to come up with reasons as to why this is really, really happening. So he came up with two theories out of this. Okay, and he denoted the first theory, and the name of this first theory was what they call the law of use and disuse. Use and disuse. Disuse. Yeah, which was the law of use and disuse. So this use and disuse, I'm gonna begin with the use first. Okay, and I'm gonna try to have quite a sassy example. If you're young, apologies. So the idea is if I have a specific muscle or a specific organ and I use it a lot, like I use it quite frequently, this muscle is going to begin to adapt and become better and better for the specific function that I'm using it for. So in other words, it's going to become longer and stronger. Okay, for the case of giraffes, the idea is some time long ago they looked probably like goats or something like that, and then they ate some plants on the ground, something like that. They ate some plants on the ground, and then eventually some of those leaves and plants on the ground ran out, so they started reaching out high. And because they kept on reaching out high a lot at that point in time, they kept on using their neck muscles, and then because of that they got longer and longer and longer because they kept on stretching out those muscles. Now, as dumb as it sounds, at the time you can actually, you can also note that they called this a law. They actually believed this because I don't know, probably they tested it out or something, or they actually saw bodybuilders lifting weights and they were like, cool, you're training your muscle and it became better and better. Perfect. So the idea is once that muscle has gotten better and better, then you are able to actually pass on that muscle that has actually changed, or the genes of that muscle that has actually changed, to your offsprings. And that is the idea of the use. And then the disuse is quite the opposite. Instead of using this muscle a lot, I'm actually not using it at all. So if I have this organ or this muscle that I am not repeatedly using, then it's going to actually shrink and dissipate. So this is the idea behind the disuse. If I have a specific muscle that I do not use often, it's going to shrink and dissipate, or rather disappear. And this is actually something that can explain the idea that human beings used to have tails. So because we were no longer swinging from branch to branch anymore, then it got shorter and shrink and dissipate. And there's actually proof. If you actually look at the skeleton of a human being, they actually have a tailbone, which many people are actually debating over. Okay. And once again, with the disuse, once I have lost that organ, then I'm able to pass on the genes of me no longer having that organ to my offsprings. So that is the idea behind the law of use and disuse. Any questions on that law of Jean de Baptiste Lamarck? All right. I'm guessing by means of silence, you guys are fine with use and disuse. Then the second law he came up with was the law of acquired inherited characteristics. This is quite long and you have to know it as is word for word. So this is acquired inherited characteristics. Yow, worst handwriting in the book. So the idea behind the law of acquired inherited characteristics says that if I have adapted to a specific change or to a specific condition in the environment, then that change is going to happen to me genetically. Okay. For example, if this giraffe all of a sudden got a long neck, then it will immediately pass on the long neck to its offsprings. Or if a bodybuilder goes around lifting weights and is now buff and everything, then his kids that is going to have their fourth would be buff, which also sounds dumb. But that was the idea. And once again, as I've mentioned, back at the time, they saw it as a law and they actually accepted it. So that is the idea. It's that if you have acquired a new characteristic, then your offsprings will inherit that characteristic. That is the idea behind it. Now, unfortunately, Jean de Baptiste came up with these things, but then it got rejected. And the guy who made that rejection is actually the next scientist, who is Charles Darwin. So the reasons, you actually have to know the reasons why these laws were rejected. So first things first, the idea of use and disuse. This was rejected because when we have these changes through time, they take millions of years. They don't just happen immediately. So if you just use an organ all of a sudden, the change is not just going to be all of a sudden. It actually takes millions and millions of years as you pass it on from person to person. Just like probably somewhere along the way, your great grand ancestors had hair on their chest and backs and whatever, and then now the ones we have right now have less and less and less and less and less hair. So the idea is they take a really, really long time. And the other reason why, which is for the acquired inherited characteristic, the reason why this was then rejected was because when we're looking at genetics, when you actually change a phenotype, it will not change a genotype. It's actually the other way around. When you actually change a genotype, you get a phenotype, not the other way around. So what I'm essentially saying is, if I got these new biceps because I went to Virgin Active, it doesn't mean that my gametes will go around moving with six pack and all that. That is not the idea. My physical characteristics will not change my genetic makeup, essentially. Okay. Have you guys got any questions on the rejections of those two laws there? Yes, Matis.
So can you please repeat why the law of inheritance of acquired characteristics was rejected.
Okay. Okay. Once more. We're saying that phenotypes were a physical change cannot change the genes. That is the idea. The physical changes do not change the genes. So because I went to the gym and I acquired the new characteristic of having developed muscles will not change my genes to being genes that have muscular quality. That is not the idea. So it's actually the other way around. If I have genes that are light skinned and whatever, I'll come out physically a light skinned person. So Jean Baptiste actually had it backwards. Okay. Have I answered your question, Matiris? All right. Okay. Any other questions on those rejections? All right. So I'm guessing you guys are fine. So we're saying the guy who then came out and rejected these theories, his name was Charles Darwin. Okay. And he's still fighting till today, even though he's dead. So when it comes to Charles Darwin, you have to know his history in short. Okay. So Charles Darwin was somewhere up there in Europe, somewhere in the coast of Europe. So he was quite interested in genetic stuff and evolution and so on, and he was really against Jean Baptiste quite a lot. So this guy got on a boat, and the name of the boat, which you have to know, the name of the boat was the HMS Beagle. The HMS Beagle. So he got up in the boat called the HMS Beagle, and he got off the coast of Europe, and then he went towards an island, and he circulated this island and studied it quite intensely. He just went around it, and then at some point got into the island. And the name of this island was called the Galapagos Island. The Galapagos. Spelling really doesn't like Yes, Galapagos Island. So he went around the Galapagos Island, and what he saw in the Galapagos Island was quite fascinating to what he had already known organisms to be like. So the one that he actually mentions in his book of natural selection, which is actually the name of the theory that he came up with, he actually used the turtles were the specific organisms he was actually quite studying. So in his Europe coast, he had these turtles that laid eggs, which are the turtles that I know. So these were the turtles he knew. But when he go to this Galapagos Island, he found these turtles having sex, and then he was like, "What? This is different." And he tried to figure out why they were so different from the turtles that he knew. So he just looked intensely at those that were in Europe and those that were in the Galapagos Island, and he was trying to find out why they were different. Okay. And then according to what he knew that, look, they have to share the same common ancestor. I mean, they look alike. So because they look alike, then they obviously originate from the same person. So he was quite smart. He knew that they had to go through certain changes. But then he wanted to know the deeper reason as to why they began to deviate from one another through time. Okay. So this is where he came up with the law of natural selection, which human beings ended up putting to their own demise. So he came up with natural selection. And natural selection is all about nature performing changes to certain organisms. So I'm going to use a certain example of the North and the South Pole of the Earth. So one thing we know about the North Pole and the South Pole is that there's a lot of snow there. It's just pure white and all that, and we have certain animals there and so on. But I'm going to use two animals in this story. I'm going to use the polar bear. So the polar bear is the predator in this case. Okay, so that's going to be our predator. We have these polar bears in the North Pole where there's all this ice and snow, and it's all white and everything. Then we have seals. Now with seals, we have these organisms of seals, but we have variety of seals due to those sources of variations that we have looked at, like the mutations and whatever. So with seals, let's just say in this case, we've got two kinds. We have white seals, the brightly colored ones, and then we have the black ones. So we have these different seals, okay? And polar bears will say they eat seals in this case. So because they are there, all of them, we're going to notice that this polar bear it will have a better vision for the black ones. I mean, honestly, the place is white, and these black ones are just there in a white place. They are just clearly visible for the polar bear to see. So it sees it, and it attacks them. It attacks all the black ones, and these white ones, they're perfectly camouflaged. They are very hard for the polar bear to see. So you'll notice that out of that entire North or South Pole, these black ones the population of the black ones are going to get less and less and less, and eventually they're going to run out. And these white ones are going to keep reproducing white seals and keep producing white seals and so on and so forth. So you'll actually notice that the ones that are black were quite unfortunate, and we say that they had unfavorable characteristics. Okay, so they did not have those characteristics that allowed them to actually cope with the conditions that had changed. And then the white ones, well, they had favorable characteristics. Okay, they had favorable characteristics that allowed them to survive. So the idea was that if you had these turtles that were in Europe, okay, these turtles, they got displaced. Okay, some of these turtles ended up coming out with dicks, and some of them came out without dicks. Okay, so some of them went there to the Galapagos Island. So they were in the Galapagos Island. Remember, right now, the population of those in the Galapagos Island, we have the species of turtles that have the ability to have sex. They are the ones that have an actual penis, and then there are those that do not. Okay, this is now in the Galapagos Island. So they get to the Galapagos Island, and then they face these conditions that do not allow them to lay eggs. Probably they actually found that there's, I don't know, maybe some creature that actually eats eggs somehow. I don't know. They meet some creature that eats eggs. So when they get there, these ones that lay eggs, they're going to begin to die because they can no longer reproduce and pass on themselves to generation to generation. So you're going to have low population of those species. Then these ones that go on top of one another, they're sorted. So they mate and everything, and you have a pregnant turtle walking around and stuff. So those ones, they have the favorable characteristic. And because they have that favorable characteristic, they are then able to pass it on to the next generation and the next generation and so on and so forth. And then eventually you'll have the Galapagos Island filled with turtles that actually mate physically through copulation. Okay, and that is the concept and the idea behind Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. Any question on the concept of natural selection? Any question on the concept of natural selection? Okay, so I'm guessing there are no questions by means of silence. So just to recapitulate it a bit here, we're saying that we're going to have permutations, right? We're going to have different kinds of species of this very same type of organism, okay? And those that have favorable characteristics will live. And then those that have unfavorable will die, okay? And then these ones will continue and pass on until thy kingdom come. But these ones, that's it. That's the end of the bloodline. That is the concept of natural selection. So Charles Darwin was quite smart, and this It's still a theory till today. It has not been rejected, and there is a whole debate going on as to why. And this is because they actually looked at human beings and tried to link the idea of natural selection, and they noticed that it actually works, but they are still debating because they see differences between those species, and we are going to actually look at some of those differences with those species as we move on as well. Okay, so we just to put everything down to stone. We're saying that we can have one organism that changes to the next kind of species, and then it changes to the next, and it changes to the next, and we've actually seen the reason why they actually changed. But now let's try to put down this Galapagos Island concept and see. So here, let's suppose we have these two places, okay? And here we have these frogs and everything and all those creatures, and some of them go there. And then when they get there, they're going to slowly start to go through what is called adaptation. They're going to begin to adapt, or their bodies are going to begin to change in order for them to cope through the kind of things or the climate changes that they meet when they get there. And when they get there, they're going to begin to start changing as well. So now when we take organisms that have not changed and organisms that have changed, we're going to see that these two, they can no longer reproduce. Okay, they can no longer reproduce. So what you have to keep in mind is that species that do not occupy the same population or the same habitat cannot reproduce. And the reason for this is where we now look at what we call reproductive isolation. Reproductive isolation. Okay, and these you have to know. So reproductive isolation, we're talking about the reason as to why these changed organisms and the old organisms cannot reproduce. Okay, so I'm going to try to link it with the story of the Chihuahua. I've honestly had a problem spelling this for a long time. Chihuahua. So the Chihuahua is a very small Mexican dog, very, very tiny. So let's suppose we take a Chihuahua and we put it together with maybe a Great Dane, which is those huge dogs that are the height of a human being. Let's suppose we take these two, which are both different species of dog breeds. Okay, remember when you're saying species, we're just saying it's the same organism but just different. Okay, so it's two different species of the same organism. These are two different. So we have the Chihuahua and the Great Dane, and we try to look at the reason as to why they cannot reproduce with one another. So the first type of isolation is what they call the mechanical isolation. The mechanical isolation, which actually makes sense. I mean, honestly, this guy has a very big dick and this one has a small whatever the dick goes into, and that's a mechanical problem, so they cannot reproduce because of that. Okay, and then we have the seasonal. We have a problem with the seasons now. Okay, you'll find now the Great Dane prefers to mate during the day, and then this one prefers to mate Kabuma December, so when it's raining or something like that, that is now a problem. Okay, so now they cannot reproduce because of that. Okay, and then we have behavioral isolation. Behavioral isolation. So with dogs, what we know is when it's actually time to mate, we'll have the male dog walk around and pee around the yard and stuff, and then the female dog will go and start sniffing on the pee and all that. But because they have gone through different changes, then their behavior when it's time to mate is different. Like frogs, you can have the giant frogs that we know, those scary ones, and then we can have these brightly colored ones. They are different. Their mating calls will be different. So this one will cry in a specific way, and this other one is used to listening to this kind of cry when the time comes. And because they do not understand each other's behavior when it comes to mating, that becomes a different a kind of isolation when it comes to that. Okay, any questions on the isolations thus far? Any questions on the isolations thus far? All right. By means of silence, I'm guessing you guys are okay so far. So now the last part we then have to understand is what they call the punctuated and the gradual equilibrium. Okay. So we know that these organisms can change through time, but this change, they are different. Okay. There's the gradual change, which is change that takes a long period of time. It's change which is gentle, it is slow, soft touch. And then we have the punctuated types of changes, the punctuated equilibrium, which we call it. There's the graduated equilibrium and the punctuated equilibrium. The gradual equilibrium takes a long time, millions of years. Okay, millions of years. And the human evolution part is actually quite a good example of this graduated equilibrium. Okay, and then the punctuated equilibrium, this is the one that is this can take like up to like 5 years. Okay, and a good example you can get is the idea behind albinism or albinos. If I just come out albino, then that's it with me, like it's over. From there, we make albinos one way. That is the idea. It's a change that takes place right there and then, and it continues from there onwards. Okay. Another example you can get for maybe the gradual equilibrium is maybe blood types. Okay, you'll find if I take my blood type way back, I can go as far as my great grandfather, who probably the one who was in Malawi. I actually have a belief that I have a great grandfather who was in Malawi. But the idea is the blood types, they carried on being the same as they are passed on, as they are passed on, as they are passed on. And that is a change that will take a very long period of time. And you'll find that for this blood type to actually change, it will probably change maybe probably within the next million of years, when one of our bloodline has a mutation within their blood type, and then it all of a sudden changes maybe to blood type O from blood type B. So that one would then take a much longer period of time in order for it to then change. Any questions thus far? Any questions so far? All right. Okay. So this then closes off the natural evolution. Okay. So let's take a quick 10-minute break. And then when we return, we're going to then start working on the natural evolution. Okay, guys, I'll see you within the next 10 minutes. So I'm not going to close the meeting. It's going to remain open. So you guys can remain in there and just keep your mic muted and take a walk or go drink water or something. And then we'll be back right here and I'll remain inside. See you in the next 10. Okay, now as we approach the resumption, so the next part we are now looking at is the human part of evolution. So this is the part that's going to be a lot. It is a lot. So there's this in this next part we're going to be looking at the origin of humankind, some of the fossils and all that were discovered, and it's going to be quite overwhelming. So um that part of evolution is going to be quite a lot. So when it comes to the quiz, we're not going to include it in the quiz as such. So we'll be resuming in the next minute now. All right. So to resume this part, so now we're going to be first kicking off with uh, evidence of fossils. Evidence of evolution. So we know that evolution is all about organisms being able to undergo certain changes over its period of time, over its entire generational line. So people come up with this and they keep telling us this, but we really need to understand as to why that is. Why are we saying that there are changes? How do we actually find out that there are actually these changes? So this is where you have to know the evidence of evolution, evidence or tangible proof that there is actually change in organisms. So the first and the most famous one is fossil evidence. When we find evidence of fossils, when we find these fossils, and remember, fossils are just remains of organisms that were left of long time ago. Okay, and this can be found in sedimentary rock. It can be found in amber. It can be found in stuck in anything. Okay, so these fossils or these remains, we study them and we try to see if there is a transition from that old organisms to the current one that we actually have. Okay, so that is fossil evidence. Then we have genetic evidence. Okay, and then you're probably like, well, Nash, I have a problem here. Aren't these things supposed to be decaying and dying over time? Then where on earth are you getting the genes and stuff? I mean, the skin should be decomposed and gone. Then where do we really get the genes? Well, when we look at a cell, a somatic cell, quite closely, everything else in it is able to decompose and die out over that long period. But there is a specific type of DNA that really lasts for quite a long time, and that is essentially what we recall as mitochondrial DNA. So this mitochondrial DNA, it's there to last. So we can find it essentially in those bone marrows that we actually find in the insides of those bones. If we actually look at those cells that make that up, we're able to find that mitochondrial DNA, and then we're going to look closely at that DNA, and then we're going to try and match it with the current organisms as well, and try to find those similarities, and then we can then conclude that there is a similarity, or conclude that they are from the same bloodline, or from the same organisms but different species. Okay, then we have cultural evidence. Cultural evidence. So as much as we are looking at the organism itself, we can also look at some of the tools of trades that they used. For example, here, our old Homo sapien ancestors and all those others, when we look at some of the tools and equipments that they used in the long run, when we look at them quite closely and we quite study them, we can find that there is a similarity to the current tools that we use. For instance, our Homo habilis, the handymen, those old guys, they had knives carved out of stone. And then if we compare to the idea of the knife that we made, the way in which we hold it and use it is literally the same. And because of that, then obviously, if we're able to figure out how to use the same tool, then we are from the same origin. So these are some of the evidence of evolution that we have. So now let's look at these fossils quite closely. So we hear these people will be like, "Eh, we found a fossil of James Bond that comes from billions of years ago. How did they really come out with a billion? Did the fossil tell them, or what?" Well, this is where you now have to know how to date fossils. Okay, we said that there are two types of dating, not the dating of love, but the dating of literal dates. All right. So when it comes to this dating, there's two kinds. There's what we call relative dating. Jesus Christ, relative dating and radiometric dating. Radiometric dating. So, relative dating, the idea behind relative dating is we find this fossil stuck somewhere in rock, somewhere deep down. You actually have to dig it out. But really, the way in which it is dug out, the way in which, or rather, how deep it is in the soil, can help us at least get an estimate of how old that fossil was. So probably, if we dig out a certain fossil right at the surface, right there, then that's quite a fresh one. But over the long periods of time, we know that this soil keeps piling up on top, and this fossil is going to go deeper and deeper. And then probably by the time we dig it out, it's probably somewhere here. Then we can conclude that it's going to be this old. And they have some sort of a key or index table that they use to estimate. But just keep in mind that relative dating just gives you an estimate. It does not give you that much of an accurate date as to how old a specific fossil is. Then, when it comes to radiometric dating, this actually works perfectly for fossils that are found in rocks or amber. When we take these fossils and we start reading its radioactivity, okay? Its radioactivity. When we're talking about radioactivity, we're talking about how these particles that make up that entity vibrate relative to time. Okay? So as these things get deeper and deeper, then these particles will start vibrating slower and slower. So when we measure that frequency, when we measure that radioactivity, as they call it, when we measure that radioactivity, we're able to get quite a fair date as to how old a specific fossil is. Do I have any questions thus far? Any questions so far? All right. So by the means of silence, I'm guessing there are no questions so far. So to move on, now that we have the idea and the concept of relative dating and radiometric dating, then let's now close into the human part of it. So here, the idea now is these people, they are not saying that apes and human beings are the same thing. They're not saying you are an ape. They are saying that you, the human, and the apes come from the same common ancestor. Not that you are the same thing. You just came from the same common ancestor. So the idea, in a nutshell, is that somewhere long time ago, we had some organism, precisely. And now that organism went through change and into another organism and into another organism. We're going to actually study what these other organisms are mentioning are into another organism. Then at some point in time, this actually splitted into two permutations, into two separate species. Okay? And this is where you had the species, and these species are called the primates. Okay? So we have the humans, this divided into the humans, and the apes that we actually have, being the monkeys, baboons, orangutans, and gorillas. So that is the concept behind that human evolution. Okay, so we're just saying that we divided into those two separate species through time. And there are probably a couple of reasons as to why we had to go through those changes. And I'm sure you can probably think of some of those sources of variation that may have occurred to bring those differences. So these people, they're saying that when they look at these apes and they look at human beings, they see these similarities and they see these differences. And you have to know these similarities and differences. So now we're going to look at the similarities, or rather the characteristics that are shared by primates. Okay, so this is where you have to be quite familiar with these characteristics that we have here. Okay, so when we look at ourselves now, to move on, I'm not going to call them human beings. I'm rather going to call them Homo sapiens and the primates. So one common similarity we have is that we have an upright posture, and this is quite obvious. I mean, we've seen monkeys walk on two legs. Okay, this upright posture, they can also refer to it as bipedalism. Okay, meaning walking on 2 feet. Okay, that upright posture is due to that. And then you're probably asking, well, how do they know that that is the case? Well, they looked at the skull, and we'll actually look at the structure of the skull as to how it actually looks compared to the primates. But the idea is they saw that we both have an upright posture, and then they concluded that, look, that is quite a similarity. Then another thing is they looked at the size of our cranium. Okay, you can see that we have a large brain space. Okay, even though the size of the brain is much of a difference. But now when we look at just the skull itself, you can just sort of look like Yazin. These people, they have kind of the same size of cranium. Okay, meaning cranium just being the part that holds that brain. Okay, and then the eyes are in front. That's another similarity. The eyes are in front. And when we're saying that the eyes are in front, this is what we call binocular vision. Okay, binocular, by meaning two vision, just two visions basically, because we both have binocular visions and our eyes are able to perform those rotations and so on and so forth. And that's quite a similarity. Then that is something we have in common. Okay, and we both have color vision. We're not like cats, because cats have a different kind of vision. They actually see things in much closer to black and white, while humans see full color, just like the primates do. Okay, we have a reduced sense of smell. We're not like dogs. Both of us and the primates, we have a reduced sense of smell. We do not have that powerful smell that dogs have. Similarity with the primates as well. We have two tits. uh this is, yeah, we both have two boobs, two tits, male or female. We both have two. And this is quite a common similarity. You can have a human being who can have like 16 kids but still have two boobs. But dogs, cows, and all those others, it's always quite relative like that. And this is quite the same thing with primates as well. They both have two tits. We have long upper arms. This I do not advise you keep this one in mind, because this was actually rejected because of Leonardo da Vinci. Actually, the idea is these guys actually have longer arms, but we actually have the arm width that is the same as our height. So it's not all about the long upper arms. These ones actually have the longest upper arms because they have to be able to swing from branch to branch. All right. But now when it comes to the free rotation of the arms, that's quite a similarity. Okay. So when you look at quite the skeletons, if you look at them closely and intensely, we both have what is known as a ball and socket joint. Okay, and ball and socket joint just means that you have a bone that has a Bowman's capsule like this, and this just allows this bone to rotate 360 degrees. You can actually hold that arm of yours and rotate it all the way around, and that's a freely rotating arm, and that's a similarity that we have with the primates. Okay, and then the elbows are able to release up to 180. The elbows, I'm referring to this part. They can release until they're straight. And that is the same thing that we have with the primates. Okay. We have flat nails instead of claws. That's also another similarity that we have with them. And then there's this one, which is quite important, known as the opposable thumb. And what is meant by the opposable thumb? We're just referring to the fact that you are able to, suppose your fingers look, those look more like wings than fingers, but your thumb is able to go in the opposite direction as the fingers. That's basically what they mean by opposable thumb. Your thumb is able to oppose the motion as the other hands. If you can actually see your pointing hand, ring finger, and all the others, they're able to curl inwards into the palm of your hand, but then the thumb is able to bend backwards towards you, and that is what is essentially meant by opposable thumb. And this is quite a good characteristic because it actually explains the reason as to why we are able to hold things. Okay, so that is the close similarities that we share with our primates. This is just the skeletal or the anatomical part as to why. Then they found some skulls and they compared it to the skulls of the Homo sapiens. Remember, Homo sapiens are human beings, and this is the part that you also then have to know. When they analyzed these skulls, I'm going to put that of the Homo sapien and just put it there. Okay, so when we compare these two skulls, okay, so let's just look closely at the Homo sapiens, which are the human beings. And then we compare to these gorilla apes and the Australopithecines and all these others, we'll notice that number one, the human beings are flat faced. That is face, like you got hit with a pan right on the face, like bam, just like that. But these apes, it is sloped like that. Okay, so we are flat faced and they have a prognated face. Okay, they have a prognated face, and this is because of the extended jawline like that. And that is essentially one difference that we have. Another difference that we have is the the brow ridges that we have there. These brow ridges, these primates of ours, they have these large brow ridges. These eyebrows, they are huge. Okay, they really extend outwards. If you look at them quite closely like that, they extend outwards like that. They have a large brow ridge. As compared to Homo sapiens, we do not have those large brow ridges. Okay, then when we look deep into the skull itself, we'll notice the size of the cranium is not exactly the same. Okay, it is not exactly the same. So if you look at these guys, they have a very small brain because that's all you can keep in that tiny cranium that they have there. Okay, but previously we looked at the size of the skull itself. We noticed that it looks the same. Really, it just looks the same. We will probably have the same brain size, but the space, when you look at the space of the cranium itself, it's not the same. You'll find they have a thick skull, these guys. That's why they are so hard to teach. They have a thick skull, but then the space of the brain is then small. But human beings, we have quite a thin and delicate skull. But then our cranium, the space that actually houses the brain, is quite big. So that's a difference within those craniums. And then you'll also look at the teeth. When you look at the teeth, that's a difference. These guys have very huge and sharp canines. But human beings, come on, we just have vampire teeth. We don't have to do much with those ones. Okay? And these, the molars, which are the teeth that they use to grind at the back there, they are flat. They're like this, like that. But then when you look at the Homo sapiens, these ones, they actually need to be sharp because we do not just eat meat alone. We eat vegetables and all those kinds because we have a more spread out diet compared to these guys. Okay, so that is also another difference that we have with the Homo sapiens, with the primates. Another one that we also have is the positioning of what they know as the foramen magnum. So when you take a skull, let's suppose we take the Homo sapien skull, there's going to be a hole right at the bottom there. Okay, it's going to be located probably right around there, and that's what they know as the foramen magnum. And the foramen magnum, it's the entry of the spine into the skull. Okay, and judging by the position of this foramen magnum, you can actually conclude how this organism was walking, whether it was walking full time on two legs or it was walking on four legs. Okay, so if the foramen magnum is located there, then that indicates bipedalism. But if it was located, maybe the skull is like this and the foramen magnum is here, then clearly this has to be something like a cow because it walked on like four legs. Okay, but now these apes, it's not exactly there like human beings, it's actually somewhere there. Okay, and the reason this is not perfectly there and not perfectly there, it's actually somewhat in the middle. And the reason for this is because these guys were at some point walking on four legs and also being able to walk on two legs as well. Okay, so these guys were able to perform in both ways, both bipedalism and quadrupedalism as well. Okay, let me just stop and see if we have any questions thus far. By raise of hands, are there any questions? Do you guys have any questions thus far? Indicate by a thumbs up, please, if there are no questions. All right. Thumbs up and thumbs up and thumbs up. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so moving on. So we notice these differences and similarities. So it's a whole fuss and a whole argument of, are they really the same or are they not the same? Are they really the same? Are they not the same? And it's a debate until today entirely. So you have to really know those similarities and differences, and the exam, they are going to assess you on those similarities and differences. Okay, so once we have that whole thing in mind, we're going to then look at the origin and phases of hominids. When we're talking about hominids, now we're phasing straight into human beings. Now we have what we call hominids. We're talking about species of human being, all the types of species of human beings. As long as you're a human being, you are a hominid. It doesn't matter what type of a human being, whether you are a homo habilis or a homo sapien or a homo erectus or a homo gay, whatever it is a hominid. So keep that in mind. So we have to then know the entire phase, all the phases of the hominids. So I'm going to just quickly place a table on the board. Let me just quickly grab the table, and you have to know this table. You don't have to quite know the dates of these. Okay, so I'm just gonna place it here. Okay, so here, what you have here are the phases of the hominids. So this is how the changes were through time. Starting from the top, we had the Ardipithecus. The Ardipithecus times, this is where we had the species of the Ardipithecus remidus. So these were 5 to 4 million years ago. Okay, and these were not, they look nothing like us, honestly. And then we phased into the time of the Australopithecines. These are actually the fossils that we have from the Australopithecus anamensis. Honestly, these are hard to pronounce words. Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus africanus, and Australopithecus robustus. These are the fossils that we actually have, ranging from here all the way up to here. These ones, we're still searching for these ones. These are quite hard to find as they ranged from such a long time ago. Okay, so these are our ancestors. The Australopithecines. These are the ones that we regard as our ancestors. Okay, these are the ones that these scientists are saying we share a characteristic with the apes with. So they matched us to one of these guys. Okay, so out of these times, then we have the transitions. These are the transitions. And these are the ones that we look closer to. These are our transitionals. Okay, these are our transitions from the Homo habilis. These are all homos. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapien, what, and Homo sapien, what. These are actually the human species more. Okay, so the Homo habilis, they call these guys the handyman. Okay, these guys had no place to live, so they did not have like a specific place to live. They would walk around forest and all that. And the reason they call them the handyman is they were the first guys to actually know how to use tools. Okay, they were the ones who were able to carve out those stones I was talking about that looked like knives and stuff. So these were the handymen. They were able to use these tools. And then we have the Homo erectus. These are the cavemen. So firstly, they had no place, but they were able to use tools. Now they have tools and they now have a place to stay. See, we're actually changing, we're improving as the human race. So then we had the Homo erectus. And then the time of the Homo sapiens began, which is this circle part that we have there. So the Homo sapiens, we first had these ancestors of ours who performed like hardcore witchcraft or something like that. And then we have the Neanderthals, okay, and then we had the Homo sapiens. These are the current ones that started 2,000 years ago. Okay, this is as far as we can date the years now, and we know this is 2023. If we go 2,000 years ago, this is where we'll find that these guys were starting to form entirely. Okay, do you guys have any questions on the phases so far as I go? Okay, thumbs up. All right. So I'm guessing there are no questions as such. All right. So this was the transition of the human beings as far. So the ones that they are going to really question you more on is the Homo phase, this part that you truly have to know. Okay. Now I probably haven't overwhelmed you much. So now we're going to get into the Africa part. Okay. So this is where they came up with what is known as the out of Africa hypothesis. Out of Africa hypothesis. Note it's a hypothesis. Okay, it's not yet a law, it's not yet a theory. Okay, we're still gathering enough evidence to actually prove this hypothesis. So the idea behind the out of Africa hypothesis is we'll have the continent of Africa like that, and then we have all the other 5 continents: Europe, Asia, Australia, and North America, and South America, Antarctica, and all the others. The idea is in Africa, this is where the entire race of humankind began. So what they're saying is we had these ancestors of ours. Okay, they existed in Africa. Then some of these guys went to Europe, and some went to Asia, and some went to Australia, some went to New Zealand, some went to, okay, no one went to Antarctica. Some went to South America, and some went to North America. Then as they went there, they started facing these different pressure conditions, these different conditions when they got there. Okay, so they faced these different conditions, and it caused them to begin to adapt. Okay, you'll find the ones that went to Asia, probably the part of Russia, they found out, oh, hey, man, it's cold. Then they started getting a lighter shade, and they became light skinned. And probably the ones who were there deep into Asia, like Abu China, so maybe they didn't have to hunt. They found that the food was everywhere. So then their eyes started closing because they don't need to see anything. And then those who are still in Africa, they need to hunt. They need to chase these zebras and these hyenas and all that to eat. So they need those open eyes. That's my theory. Then these ones who went to America, they face this kind of stuff and so on and so forth. So the idea is all life began in Africa, according to the out of Africa hypothesis. So now question is, how did they really come up with this? Well, in Africa, they found these sites, these heritage sites where they found these fossils that quite explained a lot. And you have to know all of these fossils. This is the reason why I actually said this is a very overwhelming part. So this whole table that you see here, let me kind of decrease it in size a little bit just so it really fits in. So this whole table, thou shalt know it by heart. That is the rule. You have to know all these guys, the names of the scientists that found those fossils, okay? And you have to know the name of the fossils, both names, okay? The place of discovery and the year. All right, you have to know that. Starting from Tau Mai, which was found by Michael Bennett and his teammates, you have to know that one. The place of discovery was in Chad, and there's this one found in the Northern Cape, and there's this one, Mrs. Place. So there's Taung Child and Mrs. Place, and the handyman, which is the Homo guy I was talking about. So this is the guy who actually proved the existence of the Homo sapiens. Okay, found by Mary and Louis Leakey. This was found in Tanzania. Okay, you have to literally know each and every one of these dead homies that we have right here. These dead homies, you have to know them off by heart. So the idea is, when it comes to South Africa, there's this cave known as the Cradle of Humankind. This is where they found most of these fossils, and this is what makes this specific fossil very special. Karabo. Now, Karabo is known as a transitional fossil. Okay, this is the one that actually pushed us into the current times that we have. The birth of the homos started after this Karabo. Okay, so Karabo was basically the transition, the one who brought the transition into the current homos that we have, the Homo habilis, Homo neanderthals, or Homo erectus, and the Homo sapiens. They all came after Karabo. Okay, and that is the reason why Karabo is so special. And she was found in the Cradle of Humankind, which they just concluded that no, guys, everything just comes from Africa, even though it has not yet been fully proven. Okay, any questions as such? I'm going to send you guys this table, so you do not have to worry much about quickly annotating those names. Okay, any questions thus far on these dead homies of ours? Any questions thus far? Any questions? If there are no questions, you can indicate by means of a thumbs up. Yes. Okay. All right. Matsuriso is fine. Wangeka is fine. All right. So I'm guessing everyone is A-okay. So now we have reached towards the end of the theoretical part. So now we're going to do more practical stuff. All right. So I'm guessing you guys have taken note of the important key points and everything. So now we're going to go into a quiz. All right. Just to see who really remembers most of this stuff, and who just had things come into the left ear and go out the right, or the other way, and so on. So I'm going to share the complete screen. So this is what's going to happen. We're going to play the game of Kahoot, thanks to Slido. So I'm going to share the entire screen. So what you guys are going to do is you're going to go to Google, and you'll search for, oh, that's an infinite loop there. You're going to go to Slido. You're gonna just Google Slido. I'm actually going to send you I'm gonna post the link into the chat now. So when you visit that link, you're going to see a screen where you're supposed to give yourself a nickname. So just keep in mind not to put your real name. Okay, do not put your real name. So I've placed the link there. I'm gonna get the complete link there. Yeah. I'm gonna paste it there. So you guys are gonna go to Slido. No, yes, I've pasted the link there now. So just guys, just respond if you just got the link now. Have you guys received the link? Just indicate with a thumbs up if you got the link now. Thumbs up if you got the link. Have you received the link? All right, Tato got it. And everyone else got it. Okay, yeah, got it. All right, so you're gonna open that link, and then you're going to have the welcome that will ask you to give yourself a name. So you're going to join in on this. So you'll have something looking like this when you open the link. Okay, so it will take you straight to Slido. It will load up something like that, and then you're supposed to give yourself a name. Okay, so now I'm going to actually launch up the questions there. Okay, there's a hands up. Yes, guys. Offense?
Sir, I didn't get the link.
It's in the chat. I'm gonna resend it as well into the WhatsApp group. I'm gonna resend it into the WhatsApp group, so all should be well. Okay, and Mamelo?
I also didn't get the link.
All right,
Oh,
I'm gonna
I got
resend it. You got it now? Okay, it
Yes.
should be in the chat. Somewhere there you should find like a chat icon. It should take you right into the chat box for this whole meeting. You'll find the link there. Okay, so when you click on that link, I'll also resend it in the group. So when you click that link, it will take you straight into the poll. Remember to not use your real name. Once again, do not use your real name, so we do not know who you really are, because we'll just find someone who's getting all the answers correct and so on. Okay, so when you open it up, you'll receive something like that. Okay, so when the poll starts, you'll have questions. Okay, as for me, I'm in as Agent 47. So when a question comes, you'll type in your answer, and then after typing in your answer, you're gonna click on the submit button. Okay, you'll click on the submit button, it'll submit the answer, and then we're good to go. So I'm gonna just start with the presentation now, and then within the next 10 minutes, the game will begin. So questions are going to pop up. You'll have 25 seconds to answer those questions. Okay, you'll have exactly 25 seconds to answer the question and then hit the submit button. If the 25 seconds has gone through and you have not answered the question, then you have missed it. All right, so let me get the questions started. All right, so I'm gonna hook up the quiz. All right. Yes, so I'm gonna hook up the quiz. So far there are 2 people. So I'm going to send the link in the group right around now. So you guys should visit the link slido.com, which I just sent now. Open the link slido.com, and then once you see slido.com, you are going to enter in that pin, and the pin is the one that you guys are seeing on the screen now, which is 5030722. You guys will then enter that link, that pin. Okay, then give yourself a nickname. All right, and then within the next 5 minutes we'll start the game. All right, okay, just indicate with a thumbs up if you guys got that. Okay, Tiresano is fine. Offense is fine. Matsiriso is fine. And then Kiamokizui, Tato and Memelo. I'm guessing you guys are still working on it. Okay, Kia is fine. Tato is fine. Okay, so I should be expecting you guys to be in the waiting room now. And then we're going to start at 8 past. And I'm also going to join in just for the sake of competition as well. All right, so hoping that you guys are on the pause section. So now we're going to then begin the entire game. So I'm going to go into full screen and then the questions are going to load up as we go. So beginning, you should have the questions showing up now. What are the 2 laws created by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck? So you remember, you are timed there, so you have like 10 seconds left. So you have to then pick the correct answer and then click send once you have got it. Okay. End time. All right. And there are the results. 0% of you guys have said law of gravity and law of thermodynamics. Thank God you actually listened. And then there are those that says is the law of inherited and law of natural selection. And there's those that say law of conservation and law of motion. And there's those that say the law of use and disuse and law of acquired characteristics. And the correct answer to that should be the law of use and disuse and law of acquired characteristics. Okay. And by that, Happy is number 1, followed by Lee. And then on 3rd place is Dr. Brains. Now, next question, loading, starting now. What is the name of the island studied by Charles Darwin? What is the name of the island studied by Charles Darwin? Galapagos Island, Madagascar, Great Barrier Reef, or whatever that other one is. 3 seconds in, and time. And loading the results. 80% say Galapagos Island, 0% said Madagascar, 0% say the Great Reef, and there's this 20% that says the Seychelles, whatever that is. I don't know why they said that. And the correct answer to that is the Galapagos Island. And then now the leaderboard has Happy still on 1st place, followed by Lee. And then there is CTA, no, and I honestly don't know what that is. To whatever. Next question. Which of the following is an example of punctuated equilibrium? The gradual development of new species over millions of years, the consistent and constant evolution of population over time, a sudden rapid appearance of new species, the predictable and steady accumulation of blah, blah, blah. And then logged in, and others say the gradual development, Others say the consistent and constant evolution, the sudden and rapid appearance of blah, blah, blah. And the correct answer to that is the sudden, rapid appearance of species followed by long periods of little change. Okay. And now the leaderboard has Lee on number 1, followed by CTA, Happy, Dr. Brains, and Casey. And the next question, loading. The characteristics that humans do not share with other primates is the characteristic that they do not share with other primates. Which one is it? Flat face, bare fingertips, freely rotating arms, opposable thumb. Which one is it? Remember the one that they do not share, the ones that are not the same. All right, the answers are locked in, and we have flat face. Okay, every option was chosen there. So the correct answer to that is flat face. Remember, primates have a prognated face. All right, next question. Okay, now looking at the leaderboard first, Happy is on first, followed by Dr. Brains, CTA, Casey, and Lee. Remember, if you're not on the leaderboard, you gotta like, hey, you really have to keep it going there. All right, next question. Which statement best describes the theory of biological evolution? Over time, organisms have spontaneously emerged, and animals' body parts can change in its lifetime, and blah, blah, blah. Or you guys read the options. I'm tired. All right, 7 seconds in. Remember, if you do not answer the question, you will not be awarded those points. All right, so answers locked in. Over time organisms, okay, so all right. And the correct answer to that is both A and C. Yeah, ne? And so far, there's the next question. Charles Darwin proposed that organisms that are better adapted, blah, 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 blah. What's the name of that theory? Is it the founder effect, artificial selection, evolution by natural selection, or the genetic drift? Interesting. Which one is it? 6 answers locked in. 8 answers locked in. All right. Remember, you have to answer it as quick as possible. Okay. And the answer to that was evolution by natural selection. And then next, the leaderboard, we now have Dr. Brains on top, followed by Lee. Happy is now kicked down to 3rd place, and then CTA, and then we have Casey on number 5. And then up next, the theory of evolution based on the principle of use and disuse was proposed by Darwin, Lamarck, Mendel, or Wallace. Which one is it? Which one is it? 10 seconds in. 7 answers locked in so far. 8 answers. 3 seconds left. And down. All right. And the answer to, hey, guys, man, you can't say it's Darwin, man. How? You just said Darwin is natural selection, and then now he's use and disuse. But anyway, the answer to that was Lamarck. Okay. And the leaderboard, we still have Dr. Brains on top, followed by Happy, CTA, Lee, and someone just joined the crew, which is Lulu. And the next, the growth of plants stimulated by any form of stimuli is called what? The growth of a plant stimulated by any form of stimuli. Abscisic acid, phototropism, geotropism, or tropism. Which one is it? 7 answers locked in, 8 answers locked in, and 9 answers locked in. Others said phototropism, geotropism. The answer to that is just tropism. Remember, phototropism is response to light, geotropism is response to gravity, tropism is response to all kinds of stimuli. All right, then the leaderboard, we still have Dr. Brains on top, followed by CTA, Lee, Happy, and lastly it is Lulu. Okay, next one. The hormone responsible for the growth of the root with response to gravitational pull. What is the name of that hormone? Is it abscisic acid, gibberellin, auxins, or is it growth hormone? Which one is it? 11 seconds in, 10 seconds to go, 7 answers locked in. Which one is it? Which one is it? All right, locked in. And the answer to that, hey, growth hormone. How? We never, hey, okay, but we never covered growth hormone, guys. But nonetheless, the answer to that is gibberellin. Remember, the G is for gravity. All right. Next, the leaderboard, we've got Dr. Brains on top, followed by Lee, Lulu, CTA, and no, I wonder who that is. Right. Next question. The type of hormone which is stimulated by light causing the plant to grow towards the sun. What's the name of that type of growth? Type of growth stimulated by light causing the plant to grow towards the sun. Sounds deep. To grow towards the sun. Yeah. Causes it to grow towards the sun. Right. Someone said lateral growth. The answer to that is phototropism. Remember, photo means light. All right. So the answer to that is phototropism. Okay. Leaderboard, we still have Dr. Brains on top, followed by Lulu, CTA, Lee, and no. Then up next, occurs when there is high concentration of hormones, specifically auxins, in the bud of the plant. What do we call that? When we have high concentration of hormones in the bud of the plant, what do we call that? Phototropism, dominance, stem growth, or apical dominance? And time. And that was the last hey. And the answer to this is apical dominance. And now the final leaderboard has Dr. Brains, number 1, followed by CTA, followed by Nono, followed by Lulu, and last but very not least is Lee. Okay, so at this point in time, we do not know who is any of these people. Okay, so it is seen that the hardest question to answer was which statement describes the theory of biological evolution, because only 30% of people got that. But nevertheless, that covers that part of it. Then I just need you guys to give a rating after this, okay? Just rate the lesson with those stars, if it is 5 stars or 4 stars or 1 star or 10 stars or 6 stars or no stars. I don't know why you'd give me no stars, but just remember, if you give me low stars, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'll figure out who you are and I'll be knocking on your door. All right. Okay. Oh, that's okay. Fair. Okay. And then next, you guys can give a suggestion on which topic would you like to go through next. And then you can submit that one. Which topic would you like to go through next? You guys can just enter that in on the poll. Which topic would you like to go through next? All right. Okay, so that closes the entire session, guys. So thank you guys for your participation, and I hope this was entirely fruitful. And we're going to schedule another session in the future. Definitely, we're gonna schedule another one in the future, and I will then see you guys. So good night, everyone. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Tiresano. Thumbs up. Yes. Refilwe. Refilo, just to show you alive, Pella Refilo. How? Ivat. This person is dead. Refilo. Okay, Tato is alive. Refilo is the only one. Refilo. Thumbs up. Thumbsy. Aye, she's dead. Rest in peace. Okay, guys, you guys can leave the meeting and we shall meet in the next one. Good night.